Hey there, friends, and welcome back to another 3-Minute Thoughts. My name is Derek, and in the next 3 minutes, we're going to take a look at 2 Timothy chapters 1 through 4. This would be Paul's final letter. It isn't written from a place of strategy or expansion. Rather, Paul is in prison, nearing the end of his life, and he knows that end is around the corner. He's writing to Timothy, not as a supervisor, but as a spiritual father, passing on what matters most. Paul opens with a word of encouragement. Timothy is facing pressure, fear, and even opposition. Paul reminds him that God did not give a spirit of fear, but rather a spirit of power, love, and self-control. For those original hearers, this mattered pretty deeply. Following Jesus had become costly. Shame and suffering were real temptations. Many people were even losing their lives because of their faith in Jesus. Paul urges Timothy not to be ashamed of the gospel, or of Paul himself, for that matter, as a prisoner. In the greater salvation story, this chapter reminds us that the gospel advances through suffering, not success. God's power is often revealed in moments that look like weakness. Think of the cross. 2 Timothy chapter 2, Paul then turns to a legacy moment. Timothy is to entrust the gospel to faithful people who will teach others. The faith is meant to be passed on, not protected in isolation. Paul uses images, an athlete, a soldier, a farmer, to show that faithfulness requires endurance, discipline, and patience. For the early church, this was a survival sort of language. For you and me today, it's a reminder that the church exists to hand the gospel forward to the next generation. Chapter 3 paints a pretty sober picture of the world. People driven by selfishness, pride, and distorted desires, even within the religious spaces of the world. Paul reminds Timothy that persecution is not a surprise. It's part of faithful living. But Scripture remains trustworthy. It teaches, corrects, and trains God's people for every good work. For those original hearers, Scripture was their anchor of hope. And for you and me, it still is today, especially in those confusing and divided times we face in life. Paul ends with a sense of urgency. Timothy is to preach the word faithfully, whether it's welcomed or rejected. Paul knows his own race is almost finished. He has fought the good fight, kept the faith, and now awaits the crown of righteousness, not just for himself, but for all who long for Christ's appearing. This is not defeat, it's hope. 2 Timothy is a letter about endurance. When faith feels costly, guard the gospel. When leadership feels heavy, pass it forward. When the world feels unstable, cling to Scripture. And when the road feels long, remember the finish line, because the same Christ who sustained Paul is sustaining us until the very end. That's it for today. Be well, friends.